Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. We obviously cover plenty of the absolute best, the best within the meta in Warzone, right? Whether it be the top rifles or the top SMGs, long range metas, close range metas, everything in between. But there are also several off-meta weapons that are a bit more underrated or slept on that actually are relatively good, all things considered. So if you're looking to maybe just change up your loadouts, try out something new, see if you find a new weapon that you actually really enjoy the feel of, today I got you covered with 5 of the absolute best off-meta loadouts to use. So for instance, our first weapon here is actually the Carrack 300 from Modern Warfare 2. We've had several different sort of semi-auto meta weapons have a decent amount of time in the spotlight so far this year. Obviously, the most broken being the Interceptor, but the MCW 6.8's been up there. The Enforcer's been talked about some. We've had various different battle rifles or marksmans in semi-auto be pretty dominant in Warzone in the past. And the Carrack, by default, it's a sniper, similar to like maybe the Signal. But with this, if you build it to be more of like a marksman style weapon, a battle rifle style weapon, and not as much of a sniper, it actually performs incredibly well when you compare it versus those other semi-auto marksman style weapons, right? So unfortunately, being that it is an MW2 gun, you're somewhat limited in the actual usable attachments. First up though, I do go for the Spirit Fire Suppressor. This will help out that range, velocity, and control a little bit when you are spamming. The range and the velocity benefits are huge here. I wish I could get more aiming, idle sway, or firing aim stability out of this, but unfortunately with MW2 guns, that's just not something we see a ton of. In fact, a lot of attachments actually kind of take away from it, which kind of sucks, but I am going for the heavy tack barrel here. Also extends that range and velocity and control out a decent amount. It does end up hurting that idle sway a little bit some, so that is something to take note of here. I go for the 15 round mag. If we're using this as a marksman style weapon, we obviously want to have as much ammo as we can before we have to reload, so of course the 15 being the max, there's our go-to choice. 2.5 times Eagle Eye Optic works great for the mid to long range. Then I go for the palm rear grip, helps out with aiming idle sway. That's mainly why I'm going for this. It does kind of kill your strafe and your ADS speed. Triple negatives there equates to about 7% and 12% respectively, so it's not awful, but it is going to slow you down a little bit, but it also makes the weapon a lot more predictable and easy to use. And when we jump into the firing range here, you can see like, yeah, if we use this just like we would an Interceptor, just tapping at range, like it actually is something that doesn't have too much visual kick. It has a decent fire rate, nothing crazy, but also not awful. It actually holds its own surprisingly well and definitely is a slept-on weapon. Next up here, I've actually got the Vaznev. Now, for the most part, the vast majority of MW2 subs just can't compete with MW3 subs. That's just how it is. But the Vaznev is by far, in my opinion, the MW2 sub that stands out the most and is the closest to competing with the MW3 subs. It's not right up there with, say, like the AMR9 being so crazy or, you know, the HMR's insane mobility and TTK stats, but it's close enough that if you wanted to use a different sub, the Vaznev would be your best choice. That's non-MW3 for sure. It actually has some decent mobility stats. It's pretty easy to use, all things considered. Initially here, I am going for the True Tack rear grip. This does speed it up a little bit with the ADS and the sprint to fire here. 45 round extended mag, pretty basic. It's also the only option we have for this one. I do go for the DR6 hand stop as well. Speeds it up even more with ADS, sprint to fire, general movement, strafe speeds on there as well. The Cast 1 barrel extends that damage range out to about 11 meters, which is pretty solid for an SMG. Definitely not the best in class, but far from being the worst in class either. Helps out somewhat the velo, so like if you're in the mid range, it could also hold its own a little bit there too. Then I go for the sonic suppressor, just extends that range out even more. Initially, if you don't run a barrel or a suppressor on or a muzzle really on this thing, the damage range is not all that great. So if we're able to extend that almost to 12 meters, it's actually pretty solid, and this does get the job done nicely for an MW2 SMG for sure. And like I said, pretty easy to use, all things considered. Can hold its own in the mid-range. Obviously it's a sub, we're not going too far out, but decent mobility, pretty easy to use, and for an MW2 SMG, it's surprisingly nice. By the way, as we are breaking down all the off-meta weapons here today, if you enjoy the video or if you find it helpful at all, do me a favor and drop a like on the video itself. It really does help grow the channel. And if you are new here or you simply have not subscribed yet, this is the one-stop shop for all things going on in COD, whether it is news, updates, patch notes, meta breakdowns. I got you covered on a daily basis, so feel free to hit that sub button and join us on the road to 1 million subscribers. Now, following the Vaznev, I've actually got another MW2 weapon here in the STB-556, a rifle that actually is right in the mix with some of the main MW3 rifles as well. In terms of its TTK over range, it's right there with a lot lot of the best in class. It's relatively easy to use. It does have a little bit of a limited magazine capacity here, but for the most part, it's actually a really solid, aggressive mid to long range rifle, even though it's not a full-on MW3 gun. Luckily, for the most part, we can use MW3 attachments. So for mid to long range, of course, I'm going for the 2.5 times Eagle Eye optic. 42 round mag here, as I mentioned though, is the max, and it's got a decent fire rate. So like the damage per mag here, kinda not great, if I'm being honest with you. It's doable, but it's certainly not as convenient as some other options at the top of the meta, right? We do go for Bruin heavy support here, so clutch with the firing aim stability and the aiming idle sway that most MW2 guns just can't benefit from. Plus we get better horizontal control on there as well, just making the gun more predictable across the board. We do use the rear guard. This kind of takes away from the aiming idle sway, unfortunately, but for a mid to long range build, we want to be using a barrel that extends that damage range and velo some. Then I go for the Spirit Fire Suppressor yet again, range, velocity, control benefits on there. Overall, like I said, this thing is surprisingly capable of competing with some of the best MW3 and MW2 mid to long range options here, and it's super low recoil, so of course that's gonna be super convenient for any type of fight you're getting into. This is a weapon I could see being really effective on like Rebirth when that returns, for instance, especially as like an aggressive mid early long range option. Next up, another one that you might not have seen coming is actually an MW3 option, the Core 45 pistol with the conversion kit on it. Pistols don't really get all that much attention in Warzone, obviously, especially this year where overkill is on by default. So you always have, you know, a rifle or an LMG and then an SMG as a secondary or something, or a sniper as a secondary. Pistols are oftentimes overlooked. But technically speaking, the Core 45 with the conversion kit on it has one of the best close range TTKs in the entire game. It's not the easiest thing to use, but if you can just land some shots consistently, it actually will just erase players in the close range. So obviously we are using that V2 conversion kit, which gives it a binary trigger. It shoots once when you press and shoots once when you release, so you can really spam this thing very quickly. I go for the 30 round extended mag. If you wanted to jump up to 40, it's going to be a tad bit slower, but it's also viable. It's just a matter of, do you value that mobility all that much? I do go for the DR6 hand stop, speeds things up across the board per usual there. I don't love the irons here, especially when you are spamming, so I just go for an MK3 reflector, a basic ELO sight. Then I also go for the light stock here. Helps out with control, some firing aim stability, doesn't slow you down all that much, plus we've already gained some nice mobility elsewhere. So overall, as a pistol setup, this thing can actually hold its own pretty well in the close range. It's just not necessarily as easy as an SMG would be, but you can see like that's actually a pretty crazy fire rate. And as I go through and I press the trigger, hold down once, it shoots once. As I release, it shoots again. So if you just spam, you actually get some pretty fast fire rates there if you got a decent trigger finger. Now, of course, the faster you shoot, the worse the recoil, but if you can get used to that, if you just push the close range, it's going to be pretty effective. And then lastly here, I've got the SO14, another battle rifle that has so much potential. Again, a bit of a higher skill gap weapon. It being semi-auto means you have to have a decent trigger finger to reach any kind of competitive TTK, and it's also harder to stay on target when you're constantly spamming a trigger. But if you can do both of those decently consistently, this thing's got a very high upside. It's got a really, really competitive TTK, especially in the mid-range and the early long range here. So again, if you're a bit more aggressive, you got that decent trigger finger, you can actually dominate players with this thing. It's just much harder than, say, a standard battle rifle like the BAS-B or the Subverter, or you know, a standard marksman like the Interceptor was back at launch. But it's still very, very competitive for sure. Again, we got the Eagle Eye optic on here, very basic. I like the fact that we got a 50 round extended mag here. So when we're in semi-auto and we're spraying and praying, trying to get that fast fire rate and that quick TTK, we're not gonna have to worry too much about ammo, all things considered. I also go for the Bruin heavy support. This is pretty clutch on semi-auto guns for that aiming idle sway and firing aim stability benefit that it has there. It's gonna make the recentering more accurate and more snappy, so as you're spamming, it's gonna be easier to consistently stay on target there. We got the Boremaster barrel, helps out with range, velocity, and control, so just increasing that efficiency where we're using this the most in the mid to long range. Then I go for the Spirit Fire Suppressor, relatively basic here, keeps me off the map, and again, it's that 3-in-1 combo, just again increasing that efficiency where we are using it the most. But it's a slept on gun, I gotta say. Absolutely, you know, pretty fast fire rate if you can get the trigger finger down, and it doesn't really bounce all that much even as you're spamming over super long ranges. You know, if you are able to consistently shoot it fast like this, you're gonna have a really quick TTK. If you're a little bit more inconsistent, you know, you put a couple of shots in but then you slow down some, TTK will fall off some. So this is much more dependent on your skill level, but the potential is absolutely there. And that being said, those are 5 of the best off-meta weapons that we currently have in Warzone right now. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor and drop a like on it. And if you are new to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications on your way out. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.